Can you start out by telling us your name and giving us the spelling?
Sure, it's Betty, B-E-T-T-Y, Coleman, C-O-L-E-M-A-N.
And Betty, what's your connection to Kent State?
I was a very junior faculty member from 68 to 71. I was in the speech department, speech and theater at the time. And that's what brought us here, and that's what gave me the connection because, of course, I knew Sandy.
And what was your experience of May 4th and the days that led up to it?
Well, as you heard from my husband, Larry, we had been out of town, so we were catching up that Monday. So I had either duties in the speech clinic and or teaching, and by lunchtime, I met my friends and we were lunching together, and I was trying to get all the information about what had gone on. We knew something was odd because when we approached campus, there were helicopters and guardsmen, and we knew that wasn't right. So we were getting the details. And as my friend, Sister Marianne, she was a Catholic sister, also a graduate student, and became a friend, we were just sitting and she was filling me in, and one of Sandy's classmates, a beautiful young woman, ran in, beet red in the face, frantic, and said, "They shot Sandy." And we knew something, of course, was desperately wrong. So we tried very hard to piece it together, and the first thing I did was there's an in and out kind of box that's used for lesson planning. We still use this kind of box in other places where I've worked, and for some reason it seemed like the right thing for me to do to remove the lesson plan that Sandy had turned in, not to me, but to whomever was her immediate supervisor. I don't know what happened to that piece of paper, but that was one of the first things I did. And I remember hoping that then, of course, we heard other things and that there was a rally and so forth. We were not very far away, but somewhat removed because the speech building, same speech building there today, is not very far away. So we were trying to piece it together, and I think we're hopeful that perhaps being shot doesn't mean you also lose your life necessarily. And the next thing I wondered about, knowing my husband, was where was he? We had come in together. By the time a half an hour or so rolled around since we heard about Sandy, no cell phones then. Nobody was calling in and out anywhere. And someone, I went over, I guess, to his building, College's School of Education, Whitehall, and somebody said, "Oh, I saw Larry. He was down by the fence where the guardsmen were." So that, of course, alarmed me horribly. And eventually, thankfully, he appeared, and we were ushered, as was everyone else, off campus very quickly. And Larry mentioned, and I'll reiterate, there was the face of one guardsman as we exited, and he was just waving us on. And he was very young. We weren't very old, but he was even younger than we at the time. And he looked as terror-stricken as we felt. So we drove back to Ravenna, which is where we lived. Larry mentioned the dirt road. And we were able to get calls in. They pretty much shut down calls incoming and outgoing in Kent. Excuse me, certainly incoming. So at some point when we were trying to sort ourselves out and just sitting, we got a call that said there might be need for me to go to the hospital in Ravenna to identify Sandy because they had by then figured out some of the demographics of the students who we then confirmed, unfortunately. We figured out that my hope that there was just injury was not true. There was death. And I remember thinking, I was just so filled myself with panic that I thought, even though I knew full well what Sandy looked like, I just had a feeling that perhaps I would be so taken with emotion at the moment, I wouldn't be able to identify her even if asked. And it turned out we did not have to do that job, but those were some of the things that went through my mind at the time. And then Larry mentioned the meeting, which the aftermath of that was not a happy feeling. There were people making resolutions, being in speech and communications. I remember being very grateful for parliamentary procedure because the person who helped keep that body civilized was the parliamentarian. And so calling for people to speak in turn, making motions and resolutions really helped that very hectic and upset body of people come together a little better. And as Larry said, there was a good resolution that came out of it, and you heard the aftermath of that. There was a publication, at least by some of us, in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. But the other thing that disturbed me was that the kinds of things that were being said about people who were our charges, our treasure. I'm just a kid, plain kid from New Jersey, and imagining that was the end of the ivory tower for me. That people could say those kinds of things and not be generous in their spirit, especially considering what had just happened. So the upshot of that particular event was I just went home and vomited. And thereafter, we were quite busy putting our lives together in whatever way we could and conducting, which is pretty impossible. Part of my work is in a speech clinic, and you can't really run a speech clinic through distance learning. But we did have some things that we tried as much as possible to settle. So as faculty, we were all quite busy just doing those kinds of more or less ordinary, but in a different, entirely different circumstance, those kinds of things. And students would drift back. The campus wasn't open for classes, but students would come back. And I do remember one young woman who came back, and we were asking how she was and how she made out, and she was telling us her story. And she said she was so shocked and dismayed that her dad was so glad to see her, but in the next breath said they should have shot more of them. And to me, that has always underscored the huge divide there was, there always is, but it seemed like those times generationally were really tough. And that's kind of on my list of horrors that I tick off. Thank you. The other thing that I remember very clearly was that the students got very little word from the public administration, the larger administration. And I remember that hearing tales, particularly from the Scheuer family, that was very painful, but that they were very grateful, at least for the smaller family. For example, our speech communications department, which did make contact. And it always upset me terribly that something more on a very personal level couldn't have been done by the Kent State administration. I do remember, though, seeing President White not long after this, and it honestly looked to me like his hair had turned gray and white overnight. So I knew that he was suffering too. And things were terrible for him, but I certainly, still to this day, wish that somebody from the administration had been able to communicate, as painful as it was for them too, the administrative people, to those families. And if they had done that, I didn't hear about it. I heard just the contrary. A year after the killings, we, as a department, were invited to Sandy's unveiling of the tombstone. And her parents were kind enough to have a reception at their home. And I just thought they were tremendously brave. And I just remember the look on Sandy's dad's face. I believe his name was Martin. And it was just so sad. And since that time, I think it's changed me in the sense that I've always had kind of the sad hole in my heart also that says Kent State on it.
Can you tell us how you knew Sandy and what you remember about her?
Well, Sandy was just starting her clinical practicum courses. And so we were getting to know her more closely. Some of the professors had her in class already and knew her. I hadn't had her in a classroom situation, but I was getting to know her as a clinician. And I remember I wrote a letter to her parents, and one of the things I remembered was how sunny she was. After the killings happened, there were lots of rumors swirling around that were ascribing all kinds of radical behaviors and so forth to the students who were killed, and that did not describe Sandy. She was calm and sweet, and that's what I remember most. That's how I can say it, her sunniness. And she loved practicing and trying herself out as a speech therapist. Speech pathologist is what we call ourselves now. And it's just a terrible loss that the world and a lot of people didn't get the benefit of her services.
What does it mean for you to come back to Kent for the commemoration?
Well, this is the, I've been back before, so I guess helped desensitize myself a little bit. I'm very glad this time it seems even more concrete and definitive that something very permanent is in place. The National Registry is a wonderful thing. The last time I was here, I was gratified that the parking lot had finally been dealt with properly and memorialized, and that this will be a national memorial. So that I guess maybe it takes 40 years so that everybody gets on this page and says, yes, we really don't need to forget this. We don't need to ignore it. Just the converse. We need to look at it and understand it as best we can so that it doesn't happen again. And so that perhaps we kick out some of the underpinnings of constant war and conflict.
What can we learn from what happened here?
Well, one of the things I would certainly hope we can learn is that there are so many better ways to solve disputes and differences of opinion than at the point of a rifle or a weapon of any kind. And that for that availability to be on a college campus and those resources not to have been called on stands in such contrast and is such an example of what can still happen when we continue to solve conflicts with those kinds of weapons, with lethal means or potentially lethal means.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you think is important part of the story?
I don't think so. I just am really grateful that you are doing this and that all the people who have worked all these many years have kept this going. I've been grateful for it over the years, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to express that.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story.
You're welcome.